Why do dating apps suck so much? And no, I'm not going to talk about my own personal gripes with the dating apps, but rather about the struggles for these businesses to monetize. And it's an interesting question because it is such an important service that they serve. They help people find their lifetime partners, and yet they still struggle to monetize. And the reason why that is has to do with a new sort of strategic concept I don't think any video on YouTube has ever talked about before, and it is called point of monetization. Now, we are going to talk about this really important idea through the lens of dating apps and why dating apps are not good businesses. But do not think it just has to do with dating apps. This is a far reaching idea that can even explain why Chipotle right now is struggling. And so, to just sort of set the landscape, there are 670 million single people out there right now, yet only 80 million of them currently use a dating app. And so we would say the TAM is so big, there's so much opportunity. Why don't more people use the dating apps? Well, even without all of these people using the dating apps, the people that do use the dating apps, the 80 million right now, very few of them ever end up paying. In fact, payer penetration, which is how many users pay for the app, usually is around 10 to 15%. And even of those who do pay, they pay almost nothing. In fact, Match Group, which is basically a monopoly on all of the dating apps, they own Hinge, Tinder, they also own all of these legacy dating websites like Match Group, OkCupid, and a bunch of other kind of international specific dating apps too. In fact, the only big dating app they don't own now is really Bumble, and Bumble is not doing that well for similar reasons that all of the apps Match Group owns also struggle. And so Match Group as a business only makes $3.5 billion in revenue. By comparison, $40 billion a year is spent on car washes, and $15 billion a year is spent on slippers. And so why is it such a struggle to monetize finding a future partner? Now, if you were to ask someone who is single today how much they would be willing to pay to just plop their future wife right in front of them, they'd probably say hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe even millions if they're really rich. Even if you don't make that much money currently, you would be willing to give up almost everything you have, at least many people would be, in order to find their partner. And so how come that translates to people just spending $19 a month on average when they do pay on the dating apps? And it has to do with this idea of point of monetization. Now, whenever you think of a really good business, there's three things this business does well. They create value, they capture a portion of that value, and they protect that value that they capture. Now, in the past, we've talked about a business's ability to protect that value. That has to do with competitive moats and competitive advantages. Right now, though, when we think about this idea of point of monetization and why the dating apps struggle, is because the point when they actually monetize that transaction is before they've created any sort of value for the user. If you think about it, you sign on to a dating app with a promise that you will be able to find your mate, but there's no actual sort of demonstrated value that has actually happened. Maybe you've heard of friends that have had success on them, but then you have also heard of friends that haven't had success on the dating apps, and you don't know which pool you are going to fall into. That means it is basically a very inconsistent value prop that the dating app is offering you. And that inconsistency shows up in your willingness to pay. And so because you don't know what you're actually getting, it's a little bit like a gamble. And so that is one of the key reasons why these are such bad business models, because if they could monetize after they found you your perfect partner and say, we're going to charge you $50,000, but we're going to only charge you once you get married or something like that, then they'd be able to charge so much more because it is based off of a certain outcome. And in fact, that is actually why Meta is such a good advertiser, because they charge advertisers based on the outcomes that they want. And advertisers are willing to pay a premium in order to get those outcomes. However, before Meta became so targeted in its advertising, or before digital advertising existed at all, advertisers were stuck just sort of spamming as many people as possible, hoping that one of the people they reach will be their target audience. And so if you think about how much they're willing to pay on a CPM basis, which is how much they're going to pay for a view, it was very little. And it was little because they didn't know what the outcome would be. So maybe they would pay $10 to reach 1,000 people. Whereas if they knew that they would be able to reach that one specific person they wanted to reach, they would pay $500 depending on the service. And so that is why it is so important to monetize the actual thing that people care about. And so if we go back to this idea of creating value and capturing a portion of that value and then protecting it, which is what good businesses do, the dating apps monetize before they create any value. And that is really a problem for them because they'll be stuck trying to convince people they'll be able to do something while in the meantime, they haven't done anything for them yet. Now, it is okay to monetize before you create value for someone, provided, and this is absolutely key, it is a consistent value prop. Let's say you go to Uniqlo to shop for some clothing. And for those that don't know, Uniqlo is a very big clothing retailer who makes the best, basically high quality, low price clothing around. That's at least what they intend to do. And so when you go and you find a shirt, let's say that you like, this one is from Uniqlo as well. That point of monetization is simultaneous with them creating that value because you figure you like the shirt, you're okay with the price, and maybe you really like the price and it's a little cheaper than you would have thought, this quality of shirt would cost otherwise. And so the value created, it's immediate, it's in your hands. And then when you go to monetize that, there's no sort of surprise as to what you are getting. And so it's very consistent in that respect. And so when a business is very consistent, the point of monetization can be, at the same time or right after it is creating that value. However, if it is inconsistent, then there are issues. And so for a very long time, Chipotle was extremely consistent with the sort of food that they offered, the sizing, the quality control. What ends up happening though is many businesses expand out a lot. And then they also had some unique troubles with hiring labor. And all of that meant that it was becoming a more inconsistent food service. And so now when people went there, sometimes they were getting, again, talking a little bit from personal experience here, they were waiting in lines where there weren't servers behind there ready to go. They wouldn't have the chicken ready or the veggies ready. And then that just kind of weighs on your thinking on whether or not you want to go there in the future. They're not creating as much value as they used to before, which for me was that it's a very quick, cheap, easy, depending on what you get, generally healthy meal. And so that was the value prop for me. Then they started degrading the value prop with bad service, which became inconsistent product. And I no longer was interested in that. It was the wrong value prop for me. And so that inconsistency was making me more reticent to show up. And because they only monetize after they basically produce something for you, which is a bowl that you're walking down in line to get, you can walk away. Before. There's actually a Kava, which is another fast casual sort of restaurant right next to one of the Chipotles I go to. And there's many times I walked into the Chipotle, saw the food wasn't ready, and saw there was no one really kind of working there. And so I just went right next door. And so that is what an issue is when you have this inconsistent service and you are not consistently creating value. And so there's a couple things going on with the dating app and why they're not good businesses. The first is a lot of friction to signing up. You have to go on board, you have to put in pictures, you have to fill out a form. All that's kind of friction to using the app. And so if you sign up for a dating app, you get through the friction of putting in your pictures and you're filling it out, and so you start swiping, messaging people and all of that. At what point they're going to try to monetize you is basically before you've had any success on it. Because once you've had success on it and you find someone you like, you churn. And so in some sense, the better a job they do with helping you find that person, the more you are likely to churn. They need to make sure to monetize you before that churn happens, but they're going to struggle to do so because you don't know if you are going to be successful or not paying. And so you're willing to pay something, but again, that's about $19 on average a month versus if they could guarantee you a certain specific outcome, maybe it's thousands of dollars. By the way, this is the same reason why Amazon has become so successful. By virtue of the sort of fact that they're guaranteeing any sort of product that you're unhappy with, it's basically getting you past this point of monetization issue where you may get a product you're unhappy with because it's on the internet. You didn't see it in person like you saw in person that Uniqlo shirt, except if it's not what you expect, then you could go ahead and return it without any sort of issue. And so at the point they're monetizing, it no longer is this friction as it could be otherwise if they didn't guarantee it. In contrast to business like Etsy or eBay, all of the items they have on their marketplace are different. A lot of them are unique. In Etsy's case, a lot of them are handmade. That means you're always going to get sort of a different item and you really don't know what to expect. And to some extent, that is their strength. They sell the fact that there's, unique items on Etsy. You can't get it everywhere else and it's not, mass manufactured. But it also means that as a consumer, you're a little hesitant to purchase because you don't know exactly what you're going to get. And Etsy does not offer that same sort of blanket guarantee. If there's any problem, don't worry, we'll handle it for you, give you your money back that Amazon did. And so that creates a lot of friction to purchase. Similar deal with eBay. You never exactly know what kind of issue you're going to get with the seller. Now, eBay did try to address that with their own seller protections, and that actually did help a lot. It got rid of this sort of, in the back of the mind, people thinking, what is the value I'm actually going to get? And the fact that they're monetizing the transaction before the value is being delivered. And so it is really important to think about these two concepts. One, the point of monetization. When is a business actually monetizing that transaction? Is it before or after they have demonstrated their value? And if it's going to be after they have demonstrated their value, then you better make sure it is a very consistent service, because otherwise people might test it out once, and if it doesn't work, they're going to churn. Or conversely, they'll hear from other people it didn't work for them, and then they'll churn as well. And so that is why Chipotle is having issues right now. They're just not being that consistent. And that is leading to less people going to the stores. Now, in Chipotle's case, though, that is a manageable problem. That is something they could solve. In the dating app industry case, that is a feature of the industry. That is something they will not be able to solve, at least not in any way I could possibly see now, because people are very different. And it is very hard to convey what you are getting in a person through a dating profile. And so because of that, it's almost always going to be this very inconsistent sort of service. Now, it's interesting if they did try to experiment with a business model that maybe said, we're only going to actually charge you if you do end up getting married with someone. How you could legally do that, though, not really clear, right? And so that's probably not going to work either. And so they're stuck trying to monetize, what they can monetize, which is something like a boost, which shows your profile to more people. But again, that doesn't guarantee any sort of outcome. Of course, though, the issue with the dating apps is that every person is so different. So what you're going to get when you go on a date with someone is always going to be very inconsistent. You really have no idea. And I don't know how the dating apps will be able to solve that issue. And as long as it's so inconsistent, what you were able to get in terms of the service, they're going to always have an issue monetizing that. And so that is a feature in the industry when you're looking at dating apps. And, dating apps aren't alone in this sort of inconsistency. Airlines have a little bit of that feature there too, where there are delays sometimes, and that leads to inconsistent service. And you don't always blame the airline, but sometimes you do, and it definitely decreases loyalty. So there's a little bit of that aspect there. But any sort of industry that has this feature of inconsistency tends to not be a great business. It tends to be very hard to monetize. And so it's really important, though, whenever you are thinking of a great business, they are consistent. And because if you are consistent, it's going to allow you to do this one other thing here that I talk about in this video here, which is 100x difference in return. And so make sure you check this video out here so you can understand how important consistency and this other factor is into building a great business.